The Libya Campaign, 2011. Let's look at some competing claims. Retired General Wesley Clark says the plan for invading Libya and removing Gaddafi was in place a few weeks after September 11, 2001.
Meeting the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan.
Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Glenn Greenwald notes,
but what struck me in listening to that video just a couple of days ago is that if you go down that list of 7 countries that he said the neocons had planned to basically change the governments of, you pretty much see that that vision, despite the perception that we have a democratic president and therefore the neoconservative movement is powerless, is pretty much being fulfilled.
were these planned invasions prescient humanitarian interventions? Or perhaps preemptive plans to thwart divine national security threats? Or is this coherence in war aims from Bush through Obama to Trump best explained by realist policies? That is, power considerations. And the difference in means, the overt invasions by Bush compared with the more indirect means of Obama, explained by practical realism. That is, realism refracted by the ideologies of the elite. Can you see how these 5 realist doctrines might have been involved in the plans to overthrow these 8 countries? If we replace the Monroe Doctrine with the scramble for Africa, balancing against African regimes and alliances, as well as Russia and particularly China, which had 30,000 oil and construction workers in Libya. Foreign Affairs Minister John Baird said the war aims were freedom, democracy, and prosperity. In keeping with a long-held Air Force tradition, Baird signed a Canadian bomb destined for Gaddafi's infrastructure with the message, "Free Libya, Democracy." I was incredibly moved by the courage and determination, Baird said of Libyan rebels. Our vision is a strong, prosperous Libya living in freedom and living peacefully with its neighbors. President Obama said that protecting civilians was the war's aim.
Now, here's why this matters to us. Left unchecked, we have every reason to believe that Gaddafi would commit atrocities against his people. Many thousands could die. A humanitarian crisis would ensue.
This shows the aftermath of one of our Free Libya democracy protection bombs. President Obama gave assurances that there were no further war aims.
And we are not going to use force to go beyond a well-defined goal, specifically the protection of civilians in Libya.
The British Parliament Committee report concluded, the BBC reported live from Tripoli that Libyans were jubilant about the overthrow of Gaddafi.
There's rebels storming Colonel Gaddafi's compound.
And the Daily Mail has a picture which sums up the feelings of many Libyans. They tore the head off the bust and then put some shoes on top of him, stamping on the bust of the tyrant's head, "We'll get it." Let's just take you live to Tripoli. I want to show you some pictures.
But as you can see, a huge throng of people now turning out. We spoke very briefly to Schwab this morning, who described the scenes of jubilation and celebration, saying it was a very good day.
The BBC gave no explanation on why Libyans were waving the Indian flag or wearing Nehru caps. The war caused Libya to decline from the African country with the highest standard of living to a country of chaos, terrorism, slavery, civil war, and migration. Now let's try to discern the actual war aims and see if they fit within the framework of practical realism. A good place to start is to see if self-interest influenced the war aims of France. Okay, I know, that's cheating. First, some background. Mission Civilisatrice was the French colonial policy, and Franc-Afrique is their neo-colonial policy. Are these policies aligned with idealism or realism? Spoiler alert, realism. In fact, Africa is so important to French wealth and power that both Presidents Chirac and Mitterrand said, "Without Africa, France will slide down into the rank of a third world power." Are you familiar with Franc-Afrique? It is rather like the Monroe Doctrine, but perhaps an even more predatory protection racket, where sycophantic African rulers can enrich themselves, their family and friends, France, French corporations, and the French elite. All their former colonies must use the African franc and deposit 85% of their sovereign capital in France, with interest going to France. If they want to use their own money, they have to get approval for a loan with interest. Occasionally a ruler, perhaps one who has not read the Malian dialogue, goes rogue and is overthrown by French paratroopers or proxy rebels. 60% of African coups take place in Francophone Africa. In this musical interpretation, IDP stands for Internally Displaced Persons. This song is a bit dated, as Clinton and Paul Kagame have since removed Mobutu and French influence in Congo. Okay, so far, Franc-Afrique is a French realist doctrine. But what about the self-interests of the French elite? It just wouldn't be fair if only the African elite profited. Don't worry, they get their share too. This man admitted he delivered briefcases of cash from Gaddafi to Sarkozy. Now, why would someone want to kill a goose that lays him golden eggs? Have you read any books about the mafia or the Bible? That which has wings may tell the matter, which could explain why French special forces were present at Gaddafi's assassination to make certain of the deed. That's the background that suggests that French realist doctrine and elite self-interest may have been war aims for France. But is there any corroborating evidence? This is an FOI released cable from longtime Clinton operative Sidney Blumenthal to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Blumenthal was in Libya making oil deals and also receiving a $10,000 a month stipend from the Clinton Foundation to gather intelligence for the upcoming Libyan intervention. Please read the following yourself. Now, this would also affect the power of the US-dominated IMF in Africa. Oil, no surprise here. Internal situation, that is, political self-interest. Military position in the world, wouldn't want to slip into the third rank. A battle for regional hegemony. Gaddafi's plan was rather similar to the failing ALBA, the Bolivarian alliance led by Hugo Chavez that planned a common currency in Latin America and independence from U.S. hegemony. Gaddafi planned for a United States of Africa with one currency and one army. Enough offenses for Gaddafi to have been assassinated several times. Oh, I guess they did try several times. Here's a summary in the form of a quiz. What realist conference is this? The Conference of Berlin. In what enterprise were the European powers cooperating? The subjugation of Africa. This is the ironically named Friends of Libya conference planning their intervention. Whenever friends of a country meet, whether it's of Haiti, Syria, or Libya, you know they are on the hit list. In what enterprise were these friends cooperating? The subjugation of Africa. What is this? The African franc. Gaddafi was planning to supplant it with what? The gold dinar. Gaddafi planned to replace the dollar trade in oil with what? The gold dinar. Before Gaddafi's assassination, how many bases did AFRICOM have in Africa? None. Read the following quotes and explain their significance to the overthrow of Gaddafi. The UN is just as reliable an instrument for world order and peace as the great powers are prepared to allow it to be. Kwame Nkrumah. And that significance? It was the UN that approved the no-fly zone over Libya. Debt is a cleverly managed reconquest of Africa. It is a reconquest that turns each one of us into a financial slave. Thomas Sankara. What financial lenders are agents of U.S. realist doctrine? The IMF and World Bank. Yesterday they divided us on the level of a tribe, clan, and village. They want to create antagonistic blocks, satellites. Patrice Lumumba. Aside from being overthrown by the West, what else did these three leaders and Gaddafi have in common? They were Pan-Africanists. The great popular and socialist Arab Libyan state, Jamahiriya. Nelson Mandela describing the social improvements his mentor, Gaddafi, had brought to Libya. Libya had the highest human development index in Africa. That means the wealth of the country had been going to its citizens, something not acceptable to the realist doctrine of neoliberal economics. Did the Canadian government tell you what their actual war aims were? If not, don't feel bad. Apparently they didn't tell the Department of National Defense either, since they hired the Strategic Center at the U of C to see if they knew. Do you think they found the war aims were based on idealism or realism? Spoiler alert. Many issues beyond the desire to protect human rights must be considered when evaluating the decision to participate in Libya. These include Canada's obligations and ambitions as a NATO member and ally of the US, the opportunity for a Canadian to command the mission, the chance to show Canadians and the world the operations of the Canadian Forces, particularly of its fighters, which were slated to be replaced in an expensive and controversial process, the substantial Canadian investments in Libya, the demonstration of Canada as a substantial partner with Washington, So far, déjà vu avec Monsieur Sarkozy. It could be argued that the true purpose of Canadian defense policy has been. Okay, here it comes. What do you think the purpose of Canadian defense policy is? We have this military. What is it for? Have any idea? To adapt to the strategy of other more powerful states in such a way that Canadian contributions are minimally sufficient to ensure a future voice in security operations and in diplomatic and trade relations as well. Only 41% of Canadians supported the Libyan intervention. There should be a corresponding movement to capture this vote on the part of a major party. And yet neither the NDP nor the Liberals offered a different position on Libya during the campaign. One explanation is the phenomenon of elite consensus. SNC was building Gaddafi's irrigation dream, the Great Underground River. I was told by an employee that SNC's contract was such that they were guaranteed payment no matter what. So great was Suncor's investment in Libya that members of the company accompanied Minister Baird to the country in October 2011. I suppose to see how the Free Libya Democracy program was going. Now here's a surprise. The combination of money and oil had something to do with it. And Canadian citizens working in Libya makes a convincing argument that Canada may have been eager to protect its business interests there. Canada's need to shore up its international reputation in light of having lost the UN Security Council seat. A need to fulfill commitments to its largest defense partner, the US, and to NATO. The mission could have been framed as engaging as an active member of a strong alliance, protecting domestic interests, in addition to playing to the Canadian ideology of the protection of human life. Now, can you answer the question that must be asked? Is why Canada chose to frame the mission solely in humanitarian terms, given these other potential rationales? What do you think? Is that a very hard question? Did these realist doctrines influence Canada's war aims in Libya? Let's look at them one at a time, and you tell me. Discussion to follow. Finally then, what is your opinion? Is this a good framework for explaining the Libyan intervention? Does it have any flaws?